Hey, it's my pleasure to be here and to finally meet you great people. Isaac and Kelsey Roberts are dear friends of ours, and one of those 7 churches was a church that they planted with us when I pastored Hope Church. So it's fun to kind of see the continuing story and how God's been working. And we last saw Isaac and Kelsey just before they left on vacation when we went to pick up their dog, Coco. And this is the second time we've watched Coco, and cute little fluff ball. And all I'm going to tell you, but I'm asking for some help here, is Kelsey will tell you we're co-parenting the dog with them right now. That I've kind of become a little smitten with this little girl. And when Isaac and Kelsey come back, if you'll just put in a good word for myself, my wife Desiree, and just let her, hey, she was in wonderful hands, had the time of her life, thought every day was a spa day. I would appreciate that, okay? Well, I am a church planning director. As you kind of heard a little bit in the intro, helped to start a number of churches. We started in Southern California, and God has literally led us to help start churches around the world. In November, we did 30 churches in northern India. We are working on doing a number of churches in Egypt this coming year, as well as in Colombia. And so I like to get things started. You also heard that I have co-founded a nonprofit consulting business, and your speaker last week, John Hughes, is one of my partners. So I enjoy getting things started. It's in my DNA. On September, first 2 weekends in September, I will be going to 2 church launches in the city of Los Angeles and 2 in the city of Las Vegas. So it's kind of an exciting thing. What I've learned, though, in starting a number of things, helping a number of things to get off the ground, is that anything worthwhile is eventually going to hit a glitch, right? It's not going to go as exactly as you planned or even hoped to have happen. And the enthusiasm that helps get things moving, the kind of the entrepreneurial spirit is not going to be enough to sustain it. So I want you to kind of just, kind of think back through your life, and maybe it's recent, maybe it's more distant in the past, but maybe the last new job that you took, or getting married, or going to college, or joining the military, or maybe it was something that just realized I need to make a life change. Maybe there was some sort of addiction that was going on in your life, and you just realized I can't keep going down this road. You're going to hit rough patches. You're going to hit times where that new job, the thrill and the excitement that you felt when you started it, kind of like faded away and turned out to be something that you weren't expecting. It didn't quite go as well. Anybody who's been married knows that, the honeymoon, if you can stretch it out for weeks, maybe months, it's a win, but it's not going to last for years and years and years unless you put a lot of work in it, right? You're going to hit rough patches. You're going to have to work on it. Overcoming an addiction. There's that, I want to have a different future. You're looking forward to an envisioned future where things are going to be different, but it's not easy to overcome an addiction, and there's that pull to go back. So every time that we try to do something that we look forward to what the opportunity presents, we have to go through a reboot. We have to reset things, and we have to kind of jump back into getting ourselves going in the right direction. And unfortunately, some people, we reboot different ways, and not all of the ways that we reboot are the best ways, right? That job, you kind of got bored, or they didn't have all the perks you hoped, so you just jumped to another job, and maybe that one didn't work out the way you hoped, and you jumped to another job, or maybe it's the same way in relationships, it didn't turn out, so I just moved on to the next one, or moved on to this. So sometimes we try things that are new, and other times we become discouraged and even depressed, and we just feel like giving up. It's almost, seems hopeless. Others, we respond. It's just like, well, if I work harder, I'm just going to double down. I'm going to make this thing. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to put everything I have into it. And, at the end of the day or the end of the month or wherever it is, you just feel worn out and you realize you don't have the physical strength, the emotional strength, the mental bandwidth to change it. And then, sometimes it's just going back to something simpler. It was just like going backwards. If I'll just go backwards. I remember back when, and we try to recapture a moment in our life where we remembered everything was just kind of cool and great. And, like for me, every time I think back, it's like, when I was a kid at home, right? Mom and dad, everything. Sometimes we just want to go back and find that spot and just repark ourselves someplace. But I want you to understand something as we kind of dive in today, that your opportunity doesn't have to become an impossibility. I want you to realize that. That's what we're going to kind of go with today, that opportunities don't necessarily have to turn into an impossibility. I see that, some of you wear glasses. How many wear glasses? Contacts, right? Okay, so I've got contacts in. I didn't learn or discover until I was a young adult, married, that my eyes weren't seeing things that like my wife Desiree could see. And so I realized, hey, it's probably time I, go and get my eyes tested. And I could see things close, but I realized things at a distance that she would say. She could read a sign or she could see details off, and I couldn't see those things. So I remember getting, my eyes examined, getting a prescription, and going to the optometrist to pick up those glasses for the very first time. I can still remember back to that moment, and I put on those glasses, and it was like, oh my gosh, it was like, I can see clearly now. It was just like one of those. And I remember walking out the door. We lived in Monterey, and the Coast Mountain Ranges were outside. You could see them from exiting the door of the optometrist. And I had these glasses on, and I looked out, and I could see there's actually trees off there in those, hills. And it was amazing. It was so amazing that as I was walking out, there is a sign above the shop hanging from the overhang on a little, chain. I can tell you right now, I know the how low that sign is because the bottom of it is 5'8". The reason I know is because I'm 5'10", and as I was so enraptured by looking off in the distance, this thing hit me, right in my forehead. But, most of us would agree, though, that being able to see into the distance, being able to look further ahead down the road, whether it's just the physical side of things, driving in a car and being able to see street signs and on the highway exits and so forth. But sometimes it's kind of almost a metaphor for life, of being able to just see further into what lies ahead. There's a scripture I want to start it off with, Psalm 121, 1 and 2. And you don't have to go there. I think I'll pull it on the screen. We will be in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14 in a few minutes, so that might be the place that you want to turn to. But I like this because I want us to help kind of just set this scene for us as where we're going to go today. This scripture that comes up, I look up to the mountains. Does my help come from there? My help comes from the Lord who made the heavens and the earth. And this Psalm 121, is in a section of Psalms for several Psalms in a row. They're called the Psalms of Ascent. And the reason they're called the Psalms of Ascent is because the Jews would have to go to Jerusalem for feast days throughout the year. It was kind of like us coming to church on Easter. For a Jew, a devout Jew, there were certain requirements to go to the temple. And Jerusalem was on a hill. So literally, if you were coming from outside of Jerusalem, you were climbing uphill, walking uphill to go to Jerusalem. So you would sing this song as you traveled and the other psalms of ascent as you went. And so literally, a Jewish pilgrim headed towards the temple in the city of Jerusalem on their pilgrimage to come to God would be looking up. they would be looking up in the distance. They would see Jerusalem. You could see the temple. And it was a reminder, I think a great reminder that we cast our gaze up on God. Sometimes we get so focused down low that we get mired in a bunch of stuff. And we need to look off in the distance, and that's where we kind of rise above our circumstances and the situations that we're in. And so I think the physical act of looking up is not to forget an opportunity just because we're in present difficulties. And so this kind of leads us to the disciples, and specifically Peter. This passage we're going to read in just a moment is right after the feeding of the 5,000, this phenomenal miracle. I think many of us are familiar with it, where the people gather to hear Jesus speak. It's a remote place. It's going late into the day. They're getting hungry. No one has thought to order Chick-fil-A to bring it in, right? That's the Christian meal, right? You know, if you're going to have a conference, bring in Chick-fil-A. No one's thought to make sure Chick-fil-A was on tap. So they're getting hungry, they're starved, and Jesus, is going on as Jesus can because he's the Son of God, and yet the disciples are kind of like cluing him in because they're feeling the same hunger pangs that everybody else is. Hey, they're getting hungry. Send them off. They need to go home, and so we can go eat too. And Jesus said, no, you guys take care of it. You feed them, and we don't have anything. So it goes, look through the audience, and of course there was one little kid whose mom was the one who made sure, it could be a long day. I want you to take your sack lunch, make sure there are a few things with you. So he brings what was in a kid's lunch back then, some fish and bread. And so he's the one who gives it up, and this great miracle of multiplication as they break it and pass it out, and everybody gets fed. So I would think, for two reasons, if you have just been a partaker of this phenomenal miracle, you would be riding an emotional, spiritual high. Plus, you had eaten, so you got your strength back as well, right? So this is like an amazing moment, and then the day has ended. Nightfall is about to come, and Jesus tells the disciples, because they're on the edge of the Sea of Galilee, this big body of water, and he says, hey, you guys go ahead by boat. I'm going to go off and pray, which was a very common thing for Jesus to do. So the disciples get into the boat, and they head on their way. And so we read in Matthew chapter 14, we're going to start with verse 24, and it says this: meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble, far away from land. So they were in trouble, right? Okay, so just, put yourself, maybe some of you can go like, hey, that's me right now, but just imagine we're in trouble, far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. All right? So this is not a 2022 ocean-going vessel with GPS and sonar and radios and, powerful engines. This is, the disciples out in a rowboat in the middle of a sea, and it's night, and they don't have any running lights, so, they don't know what's ahead. And all they know is there's a big wind, and you've been out in the water, here. You know that when the winds come, the waves pick up. And so they're in the midst of this challenging situation. This is like we go from the euphoria of feeding the 5,000. It doesn't get any better. And in the boat, they were kind of like, hey, Jesus could never have done that had it not been for us. Who were the ones that went out there and found the food? Who were the ones that, were passing and distributing it? Like he couldn't have pulled that off without us. Like they were feeling like, hey, we're partners with the Son of God. We were in it today, man. We were like, it's like when you have a this close moment with God. Maybe it's this, church service when you gather together and you just really, like you just know God's in the room and you get to be a part of what's going on. Or maybe you gather together with some friends and you're studying the Bible and, someone has this aha moment and they've been kind of far away from God and you can see like it's resonating and you get like, man, I got to help, share the gospel with somebody. You get really excited about that. So I think they were at this place where it's like, yeah, this is what happens when you follow God. It's like it's going to be a great ride. Everything is just going to be smooth sailing till the very next thing in life happens, right? Which is let's get out on the boat. And this is a thing I want you to know. So you got to know this. Things can quickly go from great to bad. All right? That's life. Did the disciples do anything wrong so far? Not at all. They obeyed Jesus. He said, go in the boat, go across this, I'll join you later. They were totally obedient. They had been part of this great miracle. And now, I think if I were them, I'd be a little bit frightened out there on the sea, right? This is not, there's no Coast Guard helicopter that's going to come looking for them. There's no, hey, maybe we can ping their cell phone and find out where they are. And there's none of this, right? They are stuck. And things can quickly go from great to worse, great to bad. Early in my time as a pastor, I was serving at a church in Napa. Great pastor that I served for, and due to an unfortunate situation, he had to resign the church in literally a few days' notice. And the leaders of the church got together and they said, we would like you to be the interim pastor, which means we want you to lead us until we find the permanent pastor. And, I was fairly young at the time, and so I realized, okay, I'm not going to be your first choice to be the permanent one, but I would step in and be the interim pastor. And I remember the superintendent of our area met with me and kind of gave me some advice, and he told me, it's a very difficult situation you're stepping into, and basically he was saying as you're young and inexperienced, which was all true. And he's like, I have, every thought that this church could actually split. Some will leave, go there, and basically kind of give me like, just manage it, do the best you can, and try not to make it worse. So that was like my mandate, right? So I step into this role, and I did it for 3 months. And for 3 months, God showed up. And there were some people who left, but there were a whole lot more people who showed up and got saved and started serving God, and amazing things were happening. And the church ended up finding somebody that they wanted to be pastor, and that person came in. And what you're supposed to do when a new pastor is selected and you've been the interim is you give them your resignation. It's like on the desk instantly, And I'm thinking, okay, God, I trust you through this all. I've done everything you wanted me to do. And matter of fact, the day that the new pastor formally was installed as the pastor of the church, the superintendent was back, and church was packed. And afterwards, he said, let's go take a walk. So we walked outside, and he said, I've never seen this happen before. And, he was a man of great wisdom, a lot of experience. He said, I've never seen a church that was this close to splitting and falling apart, go through something like this. You've done a great job. It's held together. The people that showed up, he was just very impressed. And I thought, I'm feeling like, I'm the disciple. I'm following God, and God's blessing me and honoring me. And then the new pastor came in, and he didn't accept my resignation on day one. But a month later, he said, thanks, that's all we need from you. And I was out of work, literally just like that. So you don't always have to have done something wrong to end up having something bad happen in your life. I mean, yes, we can mess up our lives in any number of ways and make a bad situation. Or we can respond to a situation that's been beyond our control and make it worse. So I want you to know that. Just know this is life. If anybody has ever promised that when you become a follower of Jesus, everything is going to be great from this point on, You will not have bad breath when you wake up in the morning. You know, you'll get annual raises every year above the cost of living. It's just going to be so good. You'll have new cars. That's not how life works. So you've been kind of led astray. So I just want you to know, bad things are going to happen even in the midst of great opportunity. So let's read on. Verse 25, we pick it up. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Jesus came to them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him, they screamed in terror. I love that part, right? Right? We've just been with him. It's been a great time. And now he's walking on the water. And they're like, they're falling to pieces, thinking he was a ghost. But Jesus spoke to them at once. It's all right, he said. I am here. Don't be afraid. So here's the thing, next thing. Ask, where is Jesus in my problem? You got to expect Jesus to show up. And the disciples, this is where kind of the faith part began to falter in them. Because they had seen Jesus do all sorts of amazing things before, but whenever he had done amazing things before, he was always right there. Matter of fact, there's another occasion when they're out on a boat on the sea, and Jesus is in the boat with them. Key difference, right? And you remember that story. What was he doing? Jesus was like sleeping, okay? All right, he is the one who not only doesn't get seasick, but also can fall asleep in a rocking boat, all right? So, I have a hard time trying to get comfortable in an airplane seat, let alone in a rocking boat. And so he's falling asleep, and they're all panicked, and, and then they wake him up, and he just, calms the waves and goes back to sleep, and it's all cool. But he's not around, and they weren't looking for him. They weren't expecting him, and it troubled them, so that when Jesus actually showed up in the middle of their problem, they didn't recognize that he had shown up. They were thinking this is this is a ghost, we're hallucinating, been out on the rocking seas too long, and he showed up in the middle of their problem. And I want you to understand that Jesus has a way of showing up in the middle of your problem. And it's not as difficult as finding Waldo, okay? It's not like, I know he's here somewhere. I have no, where, you're scouring, the whole picture thing. He's there. Every time you're in a problem, Jesus is there. You don't have to fall apart. You don't have to panic. You don't have to worry. You just need to look. Where in this problem is Jesus? Where does he make himself known? So you heard that I was a pastor in San Diego for 24 years. And I thought that I would always be a pastor. I love change. I love new things. But I thought I would always be a pastor. And for a lot of reasons. One of my great friends, Todd Farron, is here today. And Todd, I remember doing his wedding for he and his wife, Monica, and weren't really serving the Lord, and started coming to church and became a follower of Jesus, became a leader in my church, dedicated their kids, baptized them, just this great stuff. I love that stuff. That's I thrive on that kind of thing, like those relationships that happen over time. And then my superintendent one day in his office said, I want you to leave your church and to do church planning full time. And he said, and I understand what he was saying. He said, I need somebody like you to invest more time into church planning. And I haven't had that before. And I believe I can find somebody to be a pastor. I can find pastors more than I can find people who can help start churches. And I was kind of shocked. And our office is in Orange County, and I remember getting my car and driving home to San Diego. And as I'm driving, because that's I was from left field, and I'm like, God, where are you in this whole thing? You called me to be a I love doing this. I love having people I get to see week after week and go through life together, the good times, the bad times. I like that. I enjoy that. I thrive on that. And I said, where are you in this? And by the time I reached San Diego, as I wrestled with God, and all of a sudden I started, God, where are you? And God showed himself. Here's where I am. Here's what I want you to do. Here's where we're going to go. Here's what I need you to do. And by the time I got home, it was like, oh yeah, I'm leaving my church. I just knew in my spirit that that was God. So sometimes we just need to stop and look and go, God, where are you in this? What are you trying to do? You see, like, I had felt like being a pastor was like the opportunity God had given me, and he had. But then God said, I have another opportunity I'm leading you to. And I found such satisfaction and fulfillment in the 6 years since I left being a pastor of a church to be able to help so many others start churches. And it's just been like a great joy to see that happen. So let's continue reading on in the story. Verse 28. Then Peter called to him, Lord, if it's really you, if it's really, 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 really you, Jesus, tell me to come to you by walking on water. That's not how I would say, Jesus, if it's really, really, really you, I would have, if it's really, 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 just make everything stop right now, okay? That would have been my solution. But Peter has got he creates more problems, but he also creates more opportunities than most of us have in a lifetime, right? So he's like, if it's really you, call me to walk on water. All right, come, Jesus said. You kind of wonder what was going on in Jesus' mind right at that moment. It's like, man, probably under his breath is like, Father, I don't know what you have done giving me these guys, but I'm going to make the bet. Okay, let's go. Come on. So Peter went over the side of the boat. Now, I'm still trying to imagine that because you're in the dark, you're in a rowboat, I have a hard enough time getting into my kayak, okay? And that thing wants to flip over, and they're out in the water, and it's waves, and it's a rowboat, and he just steps over the side, just steps over. It's hard to conceive. And he walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he looked around at the high waves, he was terrified, and he began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Instantly, Jesus reached out his hand and grabbed him. You don't have much faith. Now, I think he did to get out of the boat. Nobody else was like, hey, if it's really you, call me to what? No, Peter's like, and none of the others after they saw Peter said, oh, me too, Jesus. Nope, they're all like, we're just going to watch this one play out. And so they do that, and he said, why did you doubt me? And when they climbed back into the boat, that's when the wind stopped. Okay, so here's the last thing. Look at Jesus, not your problem. That's the upward look. Look at Jesus, not the problem. That's what Peter got right the first time he saw Jesus. He said, if you can do that, you can help me to do that. But then what did he do? He lowered the gaze. Jesus was walking on the water. That means where there was a wave, he was above the wave. And then Peter let his gaze drop down, and he saw the problem again, the waves. And that's when he began to sink. So what our job is in the midst of a problem is to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. And I want to just kind of give you kind of like how I would do this. Now, it may look differently for you, but I just want to walk you through a little bit, like how do you solve problems? How do you let Jesus help you in a situation? So here's what I do when problems come up in my life. So I'm always going to start with that second point. I'm going to ask, where is Jesus in this? That's my starting point. Anytime a problem comes up is where's Jesus? Now, there's a lot of problems where I've gone the opposite direction of God. And so all I need to do is look backward. Yeah, you were back there, and I just went off on this and did my own thing. So that one's easy to solve, right? It's I know where he is. But sometimes, especially in a situation where God's allowing something to happen in our lives and it causes a problem for us, we're wondering, well, where are you in this? I know I didn't sin. I didn't disobey. I think my faith is good. I've been, a person who's been trying to walk as your disciple. So where are you in this? Ask that question and just expect somewhere you'll see Jesus in this situation. You got to look through it. You got to look beyond and see. So I do that. And then here's the next thing. I think this becomes kind of critical as well, is I've started to learn more and more to let God be God by my not limiting how God can respond in a situation. Because it's so natural for Frank to think of like 6 possible solutions that God can do. Whereas God has infinite numbers beyond 6 that are options that I would never have thought of, because I want to limit how God can do it. I want to control how God can do these things. And I've found that some of the most amazing things that have happened in my life in the midst of problems where God showed up is where I just say, God be God. Matter of fact, I give God, this sounds kind of funny, but it helps me. It's not for God's benefit. I'm sure he gets a chuckle, but it's like, God, you just be God, do whatever you want to do. I expect you to do what you alone are doing. Anytime we hold God accountable for being God, he loves it. Anytime we try to kind of put limits on how God can respond in a situation, we're boxing God in, and God can never be boxed. So when you just say, God, however you need to work this out, I'm going to trust you in this, and let God do the unexpected that will surprise you. And then the last thing that I do is I'm always envisioning, if I'm looking for Jesus and I'm letting God do whatever he wants to do, then I'm envisioning how well it's going to work out. I am not doubting. I'm not limiting. I'm believing. So like an example of this, and fortunately it hasn't happened in my life, but whenever I've prayed for any of my friends or family members who, like say cancer, for example, and as closer somebody is to us, the more we're worried, right? It's like weighs on us, and we're almost sometimes imagining the worst. And when I pray, so I expecting God, it's like, God, you made our bodies. You know every cell. You've got everything about us all figured out. So every mutant cancerous cell, I'm believing you're going to curse it, and I'm envisioning, I see in my mind the person without cancer, without pain, being restored. That doesn't happen every single time, but I'm envisioning the positive that God wants to do. I'm believing what God can do, and not just complaining about the problem to God. So where does our help come from? Our help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. So as I take us to just a moment of closing our time in prayer, perhaps you're in the middle of a problem right now. Perhaps you've had an opportunity that has seemed to turn into something bad. How can we redeem this? How can God put you back to seeing what he wants to do? So I want you to just do that. Where's God in my problem right now? Just close your eyes and just go ahead and say, God, where are you right now in this? Maybe there's somebody close to you, a friend, family member. Maybe they're going through something really difficult. God, help them to see you right now in their situation. And God, let them keep their gaze on Jesus. So Father, I thank you that you didn't give us a life perfect. Because if we always had it our way, where would our faith be? If our faith is only dependent on everything going the way we want it to, it's not really a very strong faith. But God, as we go through problems and difficulties, help us to see you in the middle of the problem. Help us to have our gaze put upon you and to trust you to do what only you can do. Bring back the miraculous into our lives. bring wholeness and strength, and let us walk with renewed faith and confidence in you. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.